Okay, we are learning Parashat Korach, and the question is on the name of Korach. So let's take a look. We're reading Otzar Pelaot HaTorah, and it says Shemo Shel Korach Garam La Machloket Im Moshe Rabbeinu. That Korach's name was the cause as to why he ended up having all this problem. Why his name? Because if you look in the Torah, Korach's not the first person with the name of Korach. Let's take a look. Basefer Chatam Sofer, here in Parashat Korach, Dibura Matchil Korach ben Yitzhak. Tamala Sadikim ben Levi shekanu sham benam Korach. He said the Chatam Sofer was very taken aback as to how the children of Levi called their children Korach. Shu Shem Echad me'alufei Esav. Because if you look in Bereshit, he gives you the source over here. Bereshit Lamid Vav dash Hey. והאוליבמה ילדה את יאוש ואת יעלם ואת קורח אלה בני עשיו אשר ילדו לו בארץ כנען. So the name of Korach was originally from the family of Esav. Happens to be he was also involved. There was illicit relations with him.
How many times are Korach mentioned in the Torah?
It's a couple of times. I mean, there's two different people. There was one from the family of Esav, and then there was the one from the family of Levi, which is this week's parasha. Halo darshu chazal b'masechet Yoma in Daf Lamed Chet Amud Bet HaPasuk v'shem reshaim yirkav, that the name of wicked people, it should deteriorate. So when someone's wicked, we say that their name should completely disappear and be erased. לכבבבות תעלה בשמותם דלא מסכינה בשמייהו פירש רש"י לא יקרא אדם לבנו שם אדם רשע. So you have a source from Rashi there in Yoma Lamed Chet Amud Bet that a person should never call his son the name of someone who is a Rasha. And we see a lot of times when people call the names of other people, they end up having similar characteristics like them, especially in families. We had a neighbor on our block who ended up having twin boys. It was his first children, and twins. So two boys. The first boy after the father of the husband of the father, and then the father would take the second name. So the two twins. Each twin that took the name of each one of their siblings, the parents, they ended up growing up looking exactly like that person. So it's kind of interesting. You had twins that each one looks like the father's father, one looks like the mother's father, exactly like that. So the names do have a connection. A lot of times you see the kids that are named after the uncles have similar characteristics to the uncles. So names are very important. ומסיים החתם סופר בדברים נוראים, and he ends החתם סופר שכל מה שאירע לבסוף עם קורח, everything that happened to קורח, שיצא לחלוק על משה, that he went to go argue on Moshe Rabbeinu עליו השלום, אב הנביאים, הייתה תוצאה מזה שהיה שמו קורח שהוא שם אדם רשע. He said because he had this wicked name of a previous Rasha, it ended up causing him a tremendous downside to end up having a mahloket with Moshe. רואים מזה גודל הכוח שיש בשמו של אדם. We see the tremendous power in the name of a person. אשר הוא שייך לשורש נשמתו. The neshama of a person, the source of the neshama is in the name. So when you look at a person's name, you can identify certain characteristics of things that he has to work on in his life and on his neshama. וכל מעשיו ומאורעותיו הם לפי השם. And the things that are going to happen in your life are going to be similar to your name and to those that you're connected to in the name. ומשמותם של בני אדם ניתן להבין מה מעשיהם. And from your name, you can even know what your actions are going to be, and even that they should be. כמסופר במסכת יומא, in דף פ' ג', there's a famous story שרבי מאיר היה דרכו לדייק בשם אדם לדעת מה מעשיו. Rabbi Meir was always careful. Whenever he would meet people, he would look at their name and examine their name, and from there he would determine if the person was wicked or not, even if he didn't even know his actions. If he saw someone that had a name like Nimrod was a wicked king, he would say the person probably is wicked. He would automatically, and it's interesting. Avar Rabbi Yehuda veRabbi Yoseh, two other rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yoseh, lo hayu medaikim b'shemot. They were not so careful with checking the names. Pa'am achat, one time, bawa tanaim hana la'achsanya. One time they went to a hotel. ושאלו מבעל האכסניה מה שמו. So they asked the clerk at the hotel, the owner, what's your name? והשיב להם כידור. He said his name is Kidor. Okay, so not a big deal. But Amar Rabbi Meir said, Shma mina Adam Rashahu. Must be that this person is a Rasha. Why? His name is Kidor. What's the big deal? He says, Kidichti, because it says in Devarim Lamed Bet Dash Chaf, Kidor Tahbuchot Hema. It's a generation that's upside down, which means the Pasuk is saying, and it says, Banim lo emun bam, and that there's not going to be emunah on the children. So the Pasuk, his name, Kidor, with this Pasuk, it doesn't ring success and beracha in the Pasuk. It says Kidor tahpuchot hema, and his name was Kidor. So it must be that maybe he's backwards. אחר כך, נודע להם שבעל האכסניה הוא גנב ורוצח כמסופר בגמרא שם באריכות. So he says here, later on, they found out that this person that Rabbi Meir said is a Rasha ended up being that he's a thief, he's also a murderer, and the Gemara goes in Arichut. I actually want to go into that Gemara, because it's a very interesting Gemara, so we're going to go into it right here. Okay, here it is. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Havuka azle be'orcha. Rabbi Meir hava dayek bishma. So it says Rabbi Meir, he was always check the names, and he met the clerk. He sees his name is Kidor. Kidor doesn't sound like a positive name. Said Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, lo havu dayeku bishma. They were not so careful with the name. Kimatu lahu tuchta ba'u ushpiza yavu lehu amru lehu ma shemach amar lehu Kidor. He says his name is Kidor. Amar Shmar Mina Adam Rashahu. He must be a wicked person. Shneimar Kidor Tapuchot Hema, like the pasuk says. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yosef Ashlimu le Kisaihu. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef, they ended up leaving with the clerk their money, their bags, and their clothing. Back in the day, it was Erev Shabbat, and back in the day, they didn't have safes in every hotel room. Whenever they had anything that they wanted to keep, they ended up giving to the hotel clerk. So it was on Erev Shabbat, and they ended up leaving everything by them. Rabbi Meir lo ashlim kiseh. So Rabbi Meir, he felt that person was a rasha. He didn't want to leave any of the money with him. He didn't want to leave anything with him. Azal otve be'kivrei da'abuha. He ended up burying it in the cemetery next to the father of the hotel's clerk, not knowing that he was burying it next to that person, the hotel clerk's father. So you understand what happened, Joe? So we have three rabbis. Three rabbis go to the hotel. Rabbi Meir says, "What's your name?" He says, Kidor. He says, Kidor, that's the beginning of a pasuk that doesn't end well. I think this person's a rasha. I don't want to give him my money. So Rabbi Meir goes, he ends up going to bury it near a cemetery. He happens to be, he buries it in the cemetery that's next to the father of this hotel's clerk. It's very interesting. Now Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, they ended up giving the money to the clerk. Itchazeh le bechalme ta shakil kisa de manach aresha de hu gavra למחר אמר דהו הכי התחזה le bechalme אמרה le חלמה de be shimshi let behu mimesham. So what happened was, the next day, the hotel clerk tells Rabbi Meir that he had a dream that his father came to him and said that next to his father's grave there's money buried. So he said, where is it located? He told him the location. Rabbi Meir realized that the dream that the hotel clerk had of his father coming to him was talking about the money that he buried in the cemetery. So Rabbi Meir told him, don't listen to your dreams. Dreams don't mean anything. Afterwards, he left. He went to the cemetery to watch the money that he buried. It was Shabbat. He couldn't touch it. He was just watching that nobody would go and touch it there. Azal Rabbi Meir v'natre kule yomeh ve'aite. He would sit there and watch it. למחר אמר דהו הב לן כיסן, אמר דהו לא היו דברים מעולם. אמר דהו רבי מאיר, אמר לה די קיטו בשמה, אמר לה, אמר לא אמרת לן מור, אמר לו, אמרי דאמרי אנא חששה אחזוקי מאמרי. So what ended up happening at the end is that after Shabbat, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef went to go get their money from the guy, and the hotel clerk said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, you only rented a room, you didn't give me any money. And they realized that he wasn't Ganav, and that he was a thief, and that Rabbi Meir was right. So you see from the story here a couple of things. You see from the story that the sixth sense, the feeling a person has from a person's name, does have an effect and does mean something. ומדי דברי בעניין זה אציין למה שכתוב התוספות במסכת כתובות, שמה דעיתה שם במשנה שאחד משני דייני גזרות בירושלים היה שמו חנן בן אבשלום. So it's talking now about another person that had a name, and they want to see the background to the name. His name was Hanan ben Avshalom. היה רבנו תם גורס אבישלום, עם יוד. So רבנו תם would add and not call it Avshalom, but Avishalom. כי הרי לשיטת רבי מאיר בפרק חלק, אין לאבשלום בן דוד חלק לעולם הבא. It says in Masechet Sanhedrin 103 עמוד ב' that Avshalom has no חלק לעולם הבא, ואם כן, לא ייתכן שיקראו לו על שם Avshalom. So it can't be that they would call somebody great, Hanan ben Avshalom, if the name Avshalom is of somebody that the Gemara tells us in lo chelek olam haba. ובשו"ת יהודה יעלה, הקשה על זה ששאול, מלך הראשון של ישראל נקרא בשמו שאול. So the question now is on Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech, that name, is the name Shaul the first time ever by the king? כי הלא בתרגום, יונתן בן עוזיאל בראשית מ"ו תש"ר, כתב ששאול בן הכנענית. If you look, that their name does come up, מבני שמעון, הוא זמרי בן סלו, שבא על קוצבי בצור, ועל ידו מתו במגפה כ"ד,000 איש מישראל. So there is another Shaul ben הכנענית. That Shaul ben הכנענית, the Canaanite here is talking about Dinah after she was violated by Shechem ben Hamor. She didn't want to go back home, so her brother Shimon ended up marrying Dinah, and they ended up having a son called Shaul ben HaKananit. He ended up becoming Zimri ben Salu. That's who he was, but they changed his name later on. And because of him, 24,000 men were killed. ותראה שם שהנה מוצאים בסוף פרשת וישלח השם שאול מרחובות הנהר. So but we also see there's another Shaul that comes up in Bereshit 36-37 on Shaul מרחובות נהר. שהיה אחד מן המלכים אשר מלכו בארץ אדום לפני מלך לבני ישראל. So it's talking about Shaul מרחובות נהר, that it was a person who was a king before Shaul HaMelech was. And they were from the righteous nations of the world. They followed the 7 mitzvot of Noach. The name Hanan we always use. כי הרי על חנן בן אבשלום מדייני הגזרות לא הקשו התוספות על שמו כי אם על שם אביו, ומוכיח מזה כי לא היו מלכי קדם רשעים, ואם כן היות שיש גם אדם ישר בשם שאול, שוב לא אכפת לנו לקרוא על שם זה. So he says, because we have one source of Shaul ben HaKananit, of a Shaul that ended up becoming a negative person, but we also have a Shaul that was a positive, therefore one canceled out the other, and so it's okay to name the name Shaul like Shaul HaMelech. וראה עוד מה שכתבתי בפרשת בראשית בשם רבנו בחיה, שיש רמז בשמותיהם של קין והבל על תכונת נפשם. So he talks about from Rabbeinu Bachya that Cain and Hevel also, their names had certain characteristics of their nefesh. ועיין עוד בפרשת לך לך במעלת קריאת השם, וראה עוד בפרשת שמות אודות התכונות שיהיה למי שיקרא על שם אחד מהשבטים. So it's talking about the level of names, and we know because what it says, the Gemara says, Avram enu molid, Avraham molid. That when Avram his name was without a hey. He wasn't able to have children. When Hashem added him the letter hey, he had children. Show you that the name has an effect. We see that also with Sarah Imenu, from Sarai to Sarah. So we see from here that the name of a person is important, and even furthermore, that a person should use his full name. So if his name is, let's say, Yosef, he should be Yosef instead of Joe or Jojo. Or even though they are nicknames, and the Gemara does say that there's different names that a person's called throughout his life, still you should try to call the full name. And Rabbeinu Salman Musafi, Alav Shalom, used to do that in the beginning of the Sidurim or the books that a person would have. A person would write his full name in Hebrew, first name, middle name, last name if he has a middle name, and then he would open up the name in the Milui. So if the name was, let's say, Yosef, he would write the name Yosef Yud Vav Samech Pei Sofit, and then he would write Yud Vav Dalet, then Vav Vav, then Samech Mem Chaf, and then Pei Hey, and he would spell out. That would be the milui of it, and that was his custom of Rav Salman. And it's a sigula that when a person prays from that sidur, that it opens up certain spiritual parts by having the name written out in that form. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. Amen.